Hmm?
I have dealt with this question of the Imbaba and the Azteca, who live in it quite at length because this story has long been the classic instance of the most intimate exchange between ants and plants. Many other tales of students about the ant love of plants rest upon still flimsier foundations. So it is with that tale of the flute acacia and its hollow thorns inhabited by the hanging stomach chromastogaster ants. The swelling of these thorns of the acacia does not occur because the tree is desirous of housing and feeding the ants, but probably because of a disease brought about by certain bacteria. Only a few of the thorns swell up, while most of them remain normal in size. Moreover, the ants give just as little protection to the acacia as the Azteca do to the trumpet tree. The thorns themselves are of far better protection from browsing cattle. Of course, the hanging stomach ants fight fiercely when attacked. At least the triple-colored hanging stomach ants, which build their nests in the galls of the East African flute acacia, have developed a special tactical defense. They stand in a crowd about the small door of their little nest, but with the hinder part of their body outward. Then from each hinder body comes a wide drop of liquid, with so vile an odor that the enemy withdraws, leaving this unappetizing colony in peace. In this way, they repulse the savage attacks of the wandering ants. But these enemies would not do the least harm to the acacias. They have no taste for the tricks of the hanging stomachs. The chapter on the relationship between ants and plants contains another story, much more wonderful than that of the Azteca and the trumpet tree or the hanging stomachs and the flute acacia. It is the story of the mushroom growers. These ants belong to the knotted ant family, bearing the name Ada, which means old man. It was the pet name given to the old man by the young Greeks. These ants have something of the leisurely, dignified, and legal in their motions, not really manly, but rather matronly poised. This is especially notable when they march in long lines, armed with umbrellas. The ants of the Ada race inhabit the American tropics, and are also found to some extent in subtropical lands. In Germany, we also have an ant, the small soot-haired garden ant, which also understands how to grow fungi. These ants build a pasteboard nest and tapestry its walls with fungi. The fungi serve as mortar, aiding in making the walls solid. It is peculiar, a marked parallel to the American fungus growers, with which the German garden ants are not related, that this fungus does not occur outside of the nest, but seems to be the unique product of these ants. The German fungus growers resemble the Indian ants in another respect. Both are covered with a thick hairy growth. No relationship between this hairiness and the production of fungus has been proven. The Ada fungus growers are harmless creatures. Their sting is slightly developed, but they fight well with their sharp upper jaws. Some species refuse to fight altogether, are most timid, and pretend to be dead when danger threatens. The workers are of many sizes, ranging from tiny mites to tall soldiers. Some species show as many as 16 different types. The various species differ from one another greatly in their methods of growing fungi. Some gather the offal of wasps to make the bed for their fungi. Others utilize fragments of vegetable growths, petals of flowers, or rotted wood, while the most highly developed leaf cutters use fresh leaves for the bed. Some live in very small communities of hardly a dozen souls, while others have a huge population in the nest. There are dwarf nests for one species and gigantic nests for others. Some build hanging mushroom gardens. Others lay them on the soil of their hothouses. Even the mushrooms appear to differ considerably from the species of the producers, but none refuse to eat what the others have grown. Everyone who has traveled through the American primeval forests has seen the leaf cutters. The Indians of Brazil call them sadaba. They travel in long lines over the ground, each one bearing a parasol, which they have cut out of a leaf. usually twice the size of the ant. It looks as if they were sailing along, or as if they were protecting themselves from the rays of the sun. They climb the trees and bushes, clip out the piece of the leaf they desire, and take it to their nest. They may be watched easily, as they strip a bush with their sharp shears, never seeming to hasten as they labor. When a young queen flies out into the world to share in the joys of wedlock and find a people, she is strong, well, and fully nourished. She takes no baggage with her and no provisions for the journey. But she has her food. The fungus is sacred to these ants. Around it, all the life of the queen centers. How she finds it we do not know. Some heroine of her people must have discovered it, as Prometheus snatched the fire from heaven. This young queen carries in a pocket of her mouth a little of this mushroom spawn on her hymeneal flight.
Oh my God! No!
She finds her beloved and is wedded. As soon as she feels that she is to become a mother, she digs into the earth, hollows out a small chamber, and closes it up from the eyes of the world. Her work is harder than that of all other ant queens, and much greater than that of the neighboring Azteca queen, who receives a home and nourishment from the trumpet tree, having only to lay her eggs and care for the hatching of her brood. The queen of the leaf cutters, however, has to build her home with great care, looking after her own food supply, for her most strenuous effort produces only a limited quantity. She has to rear her young and prepare the mushroom garden for the future people which she can enjoy only a little. She is not only a mother and queen but also the foster mother of her people. Hardly has she immured herself in her dark home, withdrawing into the earth, when she spits out the heritage of her mother, that all-important mushroom spawn. Now follows a couple of days' rest, during which the mushroom spawn grows very rapidly. On the third day, the egg-laying begins, and at the same time the continuous care of the growing mushroom garden. It must be fertilized, and so carefully that the smallest bit of spawn receives the greatest possible food value. The young queen also brought this fertilizer with her. It comes from within herself. The Chinese living in large cities are intensely fond of flowers, cultivating them and rearing them with greater care than any other people in the world. Fertilizer in the great cities is hard to secure, so they are most careful to gather what they can at home and from their friends. But even the Chinese cannot give the care and patience bestowed by the queen of the ants. She bestows her largesse upon each particle of spawn with meticulous care, pressing all into place. But now, if the gardener is to do her work well, she too must have nourishment. The queen dare not eat any of the mushrooms in that garden, for they must grow large and full to feed her coming children. There is nothing else to eat in the narrow chamber. The queen takes counsel with herself. She has her food within herself. After the third day of her imprisonment, she lays approximately 10 eggs each day, and she eats most of these. In this way, she keeps herself alive and retains the strength to tend her mushroom garden. The queen gets very little rest, for besides tending her garden she has to smooth her room, keep herself clean, and rear her brood, which she lays amid her mushroom garden. As soon as the larvae are hatched from the eggs, their mother feeds them, as she does herself, with mashed eggs, scrambled eggs, 9 of the 10 which she lays daily being consumed in this way. When the first young ants emerge from their pupae, they are dwarfs, the smallest of workers. The mushroom garden, which the queen mother had planted, has grown from a small fraction of an inch to an inch in diameter. The little daughters begin to help their mother with her work at once. They take over the feeding and cleansing of the young brood, which is still fed with the eggs of their mother, while the little ants begin to feed on the mushrooms from the garden. They also help their mother in the fertilizing of the garden. The queen mother superintends the work and still helps. About a week after the young ants have made their way out of the pups, they begin to dig, and after a few days have made an exit to the surface. Now the real work of the young people begins. While the queen leaves all the labor to her daughters, she does nothing else than lay eggs. The young ants progressing day by day in their work in the outer world. They climb reeds and bushes, cutting off leaves, and sail back to the nest with them. The pieces of leaves are cut into small bits and kneaded into balls. Henceforward they serve as fertilizer for the ever-expanding mushroom garden, the other fertilizer being no longer used. At the same time, all cannibalism stops. Not only do the ants feed upon the mushrooms, but the larvae are fed with them. Apparently, this food is far more nourishing than the eggs. For now, we get workers much larger than the first dwarfs, some of them 6 times as large, and some males and females which are still larger. New mushroom gardens were added to the first, and more subterranean hothouses were built. The size of the city grows with the number of inhabitants, increasing enormously. One of these hothouses, a chamber in the earth for growing the mushrooms, may be extended to 20 inches and a foot high and broad. Some investigators report mushroom gardens a yard high and 6 yards in diameter. The passages lead as deep as 17 feet into the earth. The doorways are made wide to allow for circulation of air, as in the case of the honey ants. The many flues built over the city have a diameter of a yard. The entire nest may cover a space of 100 square yards. Each one of the innumerable chambers has a sponge-like mushroom garden in which the eggs and larvae lie soft. The division of labor is now strictly enforced. The medium-sized workers must cut leaves and bring them to the nest, while the very large ones serve as soldiers and guards at the doors. Smaller ants knead the bits of leaves into balls and build up the new mushroom gardens, taking the fresh leaf mass into the old gardens, removing the old, and taking it to the garbage heap. The smallest ants take care of the queen and the brood. The smallest dwarfs have very important work to do. They are the real gardeners. They take out all weeds, especially other kinds of mushrooms that spring up in the hothouses, for only the snow-white mushrooms should appear on that brown leaf bed. Even this fungus must not grow at will, but only as the ants desire. If let alone, this fungus would grow long stems, real mushrooms, as high as 5 inches. But the ants do not want this. The small ants bite off the budding stems daily and hourly. In this way, they develop small round or oval expansions. The German discoverers who first found these called them kohlrabi, rape coal.
This rape coal, which hangs all over the white mushroom garden, like clear drops of water, serves all these ant people for food. The mushrooms, rather the various mushrooms, for the different species of the atta, grow different varieties of mushrooms, are exclusively ant products. The mushrooms that we find in these gardens do not exist outside of them, just as men have developed vegetables and flowers that never appear in uncultivated wilds. The peoples of the mushroom growers wax many and mighty. They are really the lords of the American tropical forest. Numerous as the dangers to the individual ant may be, just as few are they to the whole people. Even man, whose feelings are hurt because these ants seem to prefer the leaves of his shade trees, can do them little harm. I have seen them smoke out nests often. They dig a hole 7 feet deep in the ground, place lighted dry brush in it, and sulfur all over it. They cover the hole with an iron plate and blow the fire with strong bellows. Many yards away, the porter ants will be seen, coming out of the nest and taking the brood to safety. This method of destruction is tiresome, expensive, and by no means sure. If the queen lies very deep, the smoke does not reach her, and all the labor is in vain. For this reason, many farmers dig down into the nest until they find the queen. This is a very troublesome task, and the result is not absolutely certain either. The people of the porter ants accept young fructified queens. If the old one dies or loses her power of generation, the people are revivified. It seems as if the powers of nature are just as helpless as man against the gigantic hosts of the mushroom ants. If lightning strikes the largest trees, sets fire to the trunks, and a mighty fire spreads through the forest, the atta ants are quite safe in their nests, deep down in the earth. They have enough provision in their gardens to last during the lean season, until the leaves are green on the trees again. In the interval, they can gather the fertilizer from other parts of plants. Even great floods do not annihilate their people. If there is a large community of ants, they roll themselves into a huge ball, with the queen and the brood in the center, not forgetting the holy mushroom spawn. In this way, the people float on the water and erect a new city on any ground it reaches. Chapter 8. the cattle-keeping ants.
During ancient times, early races of mankind passed from living in the forest to cattle keeping. It was because they had found out that some animals were more useful to them alive than dead. We can do nothing more with a dead animal than eat its flesh. But a living animal that gives milk may be milked daily and finally eaten. The ants passed through a similar experience. The people who eat nothing but meat, the hunters, know nothing about cattle keeping. These, among our insects, are the stinging ants and the wandering ants. Among all other races, we find cattle keeping more or less highly developed all over the earth. As is the case with man, we humans get the sweet liquid from cows and goats, from sheep and asses, from reindeer and camels. The ants know no smaller than several creatures adapted to being milked by them. As the cow is our favorite, so is the leaf louse to them. They also have leaf fleas, crickets, blue wasp grubs, and lightning bugs. What the ants milk from their cattle is not exactly milk. It is called honeydew, or to use the biblical name, manna. Pious souls might think of it as the most precious, divine food, no less delicious than nectar and ambrosia. The leaf lice and the other cows used by the ants suck the sap from plants with their proboscis, or, as in the case of the blue wasp, devour the young leaves. They eat or drink very much and digest very little, and the sweet liquid becomes sweeter for passing through their bodies. They send it out in small, colorless drops, which fall upon leaves and plants and dry in the air very quickly. This is what the ancients called rosmelius, honeydew. They believed, like the Israelites in the wilderness, that it had fallen from heaven. Israel had left Egypt only a few weeks before. It was encamped in the wilderness between Elim and Sinai. Provisions were exhausted. The people sighed for the fleshpots of Egypt and murmured loudly. Then God sent quails and manna. This manna looked like coriander seed white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. When the sun was hot, it melted. It is true that while the Jews were in Egypt, they did not get out into the open very often. Otherwise, the honeydew would not have been so unknown to them that asked one another, "Man who? What is that?" Giving the sweet food a name in this way. Many other nations had known honeydew for a long time and prized it as a tidbit. And all of them, like the Jews, took it for granted that it was dew from heaven, and no one, up to our day, really explained its origin. The plant louse that provides the manna minifera of Sinai lives upon the tamarisks and deposits its honeydew, just as the Bible says, not only upon the leaves but also upon the ground. Even today the Arabs gather this food and call it manna, the name that was used in the time of Moses. The monks of the monastery on Sinai sell biblical manna, and it is sold as manna all over Persia. The beautiful dream that the manna fell from heaven rested chiefly upon the powerful support of biblical authority, rather than upon Arabic, Greek, or Roman legend. Ray Muir, who made the thermometer, discovered, less than 2 centuries ago, that this delicious dew came not from heaven, but from a small green louse. Does manna taste any worse now that we know whence it comes? The children who gather it when they can care little about its source, nor have grown-ups any prejudice against it, for they eat much filthier things. The food of the plant louse is the cleanest possible, the juice of plants. Many tree insects produce manna in large quantities. When we see what value is attached to it on the peninsula of Lebanon, we are tempted to accept the general purport of the 16th chapter of Exodus as true. There it is said that everyone should gather as much manna as he desires each day. Some gathered more than they needed and kept it overnight. Then the manna stank and worms issued from it. Quite true. Spores of fungi do cling to the honeydew and grow out of it, and melted dew is the result. The Australian producers of manna, the leaf fleas, are esteemed by all the natives as well as by the children of the whites as sugar plums. A man can gather 3 pounds of manna in a day, certainly more than he can eat, for a person may have too much even of manna. It was most wise that God sent quails also to the people of Israel, food which I prefer to the best manna. The ants are fond of anything sweet and are lured by it. Their prehistoric ancestors of the earliest ages, wild hunters as they were, tasted these sweet drops from the plant lice and esteemed them highly. Then the ants found the honeydew, which tasted far better than the plant lice. They understood, many million years before men knew it, what this honeydew really was. And they saw that it was far more convenient to lick up the flowing sweet liquid than to knock off the hard and sweet food. In this way, they attained the thought of gathering manna at the source, from the manna-distributing animal itself. This idea was much more brilliant than that of man. When he began to milk cows and goats, the human mother nurses her child like all other mammals. The drama is played daily. What was so good for the child, for the calf and the kid, what made them strong and hardy, should be good for grown persons. Therefore mankind began to milk cattle. Of course, they began first by using the mouth. Only later did man learn how to use the hands and a milk pail. Man saw what was going on in nature, and did nothing more than imitate. But the ants saw nothing like their method, imitated no one. Their discovery that it is possible to milk lice originated in their own brains. The leaf lice, like all the other ant cattle, are gentle and amenable creatures, so kindly and friendly in disposition as to be comparable with our gentlest cows. They live in herds, eat voraciously, and therefore produce a tremendous quantity of sweet liquid. In short, they perform the function required of them by the ants. It seems even as if they enjoy the attentions bestowed upon them by the ants, just as the cows seem to feel relieved when the milk has been drawn from them. How the ants milk their cattle may be observed by anyone. Leaf lice are to be found everywhere, and wherever they are, ants are not lacking. The louse sits on the leaf, very solidly, its sucking trunk being fastened deeply into the leaf. The ant places itself behind the louse, and begins to stroke and tickle its green body with her feelers. Then the louse bends her head, raises the hind part of the body, and stretches the hind legs up into the air, to make the work easy for the milkmaid. Shortly thereafter, a clear drop comes from her, which the ant eagerly laps up. The milkmaid continues stroking the louse gently, first on the right side, then on the left, until the gentle creature lets down a second, even a third drop of manna. Having milked one dry, the ant goes to the next louse, milking them one after the other, until her milk pail is filled to the brim. The milk pail is her communal crop stomach, which she has learned to expand in such a fashion that her hind body is swollen tremendously, and she can barely stagger home very slowly. The ant cows are not stingy, but give their sweet fluid willingly and richly. If one of them is empty, the milkmaid must wait a while. The leaf lice have also learned how to deliver their sweet gift to the ants. If they do not wish to be milked, they shoot their sweet drops some distance, and at the same time they kick back, like a fretful donkey. If they are milked, they let the drop issue slowly, so that the ant can lap it up easily. They have also learned to be good and to wait until the herder comes, so that the first drop is very large. More than this, they eat more, and as a result produce a large quantity of manna when they are being milked by the ants, than when they are living an uncontrolled life in the open. They may have taught this to themselves, but it seems more probable that their mistresses, the ants, have brought it about in some way. At any rate, it is certain that our black-haired garden ants get much more manna milk from their cattle than any other ants do. This is not difficult to determine. The more manna the lice give forth, the more sap they have absorbed, and the more the plants suffer from this process. No beanstalks suffer more than those upon which the expert milkmaids of the people of the black-haired ants keep their herds. The art of milking has to be learned, whether it be the cows used by men or the lice used by ants. Darwin was a poor milkmaid. He was the first to try to imitate the ant in milking the louse, but he failed. Since his time, men have learned how to imitate the tickling of the ant feelers, and the little green cow gives her milk. The connection between the two creatures is not limited to this milking. While this is the ant's sole reason for loving the plant louse, if you keep cattle, you must know how to protect them. And that is what the ants do. Of course, the leaf lice are not altogether defenseless. On the hind body they have glands with outer openings, from which they can spurt a liquid. Linnaeus thought that the honeydew came from these glands. Only later was it proved to come directly from the body of the louse. The lice spurt from their glands a gluey, wax-like matter, their only weapon against many foes. This glue is spurted into the enemy's face, where it dries quickly, and the attacking insect has hard work to free itself of this encumbrance. But this really does not help the poor leaf louse much. For with its trunk deeply sunk into the leaf, it cannot escape quickly. And in that great murder-seller nature, in which the larger devours the smaller, a new enemy appears ready to devour. The lice do not use their spurting glands against the ants, the best sign that they do not consider them enemies, but are accustomed to them. As a matter of fact, the protection offered by the ants is far greater than their own means of defense. If the leaf louse, an easy prey for every robber looking for this tidbit, is attacked, the ants are transformed at once from quiet herders into savage warriors, who protect their cattle and attack their enemies mercilessly.